Okay, here we're going to be looking at some of the structures that are a little bit different in the bovine. Just to orient ourselves, we're looking at the lateral aspect of the left thoracic limb. We see our trapezius cervical part here. If we flip that up, we can see our serratus ventralis cervicis muscle. Deep to that, our rhomboideus cervicis muscle. And finally, our rhomboideus thoracis muscle. A little bit different here is the fact that we can clearly see the omo transversarius right next to the cleidocephalicus. And in the bovine, the cleidocephalicus muscle is made up of two parts. You have the cleidomastoideus or cleidooccipitalis, and this piece that's traveling up through here is your cleidomastoideus muscle. Another difference is going to be the two parts to your sternocephalicus muscle, with those being the sternomandibularis, and deep to that, your sternomastoideus muscle. If we open up our sternocephalicus, now we can see our sternohyoideus muscle, and just deep and lateral to that, our sternothyroideus muscle. So here, if we look straight on, we can actually see four muscles. We start with our sternothyroideus, then we have our sternohyoideus, then we have the other side sternohyoideus, followed by the other side sternothyroideus. So all four of those muscles are in this group right here. The other muscle that we should be able to visualize, no, maybe not. We'll have to find it on the other side probably. Yes, it's on the other side. Anyway, let's come back here. This glandular looking tissue that we see here is going to be the cervical portion of the thymus. Again, we're into the carotid sheath over here. We see our internal jugular vein right next to our common carotid artery, and finally our vagosympathetic trunk. If we look on the left side, we can also see our esophagus. This very large vessel right here is the external jugular vein. And if we come down here, we can actually see the cephalic vein that's going to be traveling through this lateral pectoral groove in order to dump into that external jugular vein. Here we're looking at some of the deep muscles that are found on the epaxial side, with the first one being this muscle right here that's spanning in this caudoventral direction. And that's going to be the levator caustae muscle. Next, we see these individual fascicles of muscle kind of right on the midline, and those are going to be the multifidus thoracis muscles. If we come cranially, we're going to reorient ourselves to some of these deeper neck muscles in the bovine, because they're just a little bit different. The first one we're going to see, well, let's actually start deep and then work superficial. Here we can also see the multifidus cervicis in the bovine, as well as the spinalis cervicis in the bovine. Here we can also again see our deep cervical artery coming out on the underside or the deep side of the semispinalis capitis. The semispinalis capitis is composed again of the biventer cervicis as well as the complexus. Now if we look cranially, here we can just see the caudal aspects of the rectus capitis dorsalis major, as well as the obliquus capitis caudalis. Now as we start to put some of these pieces together, the next muscle I want to look at is going to be the longissimus capitis, which is this muscle that's transected right here, followed by this muscle, which is the longissimus atlantis. As we continue ventrally, we see the longissimus cervicis in this region, these multiple fascicles right here. The next couple pieces that we're going to see are going to be the intertransversarii muscles. So that's these small fascicles that are kind of in between the longissimus system and the longus system. So now we can look here to find our longus atlantis muscle, which is these two pieces together. So this muscle that we see right here is our longus atlantis, and it's being pierced by this nerve, which is your third cervical spinal nerve. So the longus atlantis usually appears to be two different pieces, but it's all of the same muscle. This tiny little flap of muscle that's covering that longus atlantis is the omohyoideus muscle in the bovine. If we move that omohyoideus and reflect our longus atlantis, we see this next muscle running right next to it, and that's going to be the longus capitis muscle in the bovine. The longus atlantis and the longus capitis muscles in the bovine will lead you right down to the scalenus muscle. So here we see our scalenus ventralis muscle, and our scalenus dorsalis muscle, okay? The dividing line between these is going to be that brachial plexus right in this region, okay? So this is scalenus ventralis, this is scalenus dorsalis. If we reflect scalenus dorsalis, now we can see our scalenus medius muscle. So that is going to be dorsal to our brachial plexus in the bovine, and deep to where the scalenus dorsalis would be attaching. Here we're looking into the right side of the thorax. We see this large nerve running right down the middle of the thorax, and that's going to be the phrenic nerve traveling here to the diaphragm. We also see our caudal vena cava covered by this fold of pleura, which is the plica vena cava. Just medial to the plica vena cava is this recess where the accessory lobe of the right lung would be sitting, and that's going to be the mediastinal recess. In this region, we can also see the presence of the esophagus, and just dorsal to the esophagus right here in the caudal mediastinum is going to be a large caudal mediastinal lymph node. Here we can see our thoracic trachea moving caudally. We see the presence of the tracheal bronchus here, which will be supplying air to the cranial lung lobe of the right lung, specifically the cranial and caudal parts to the cranial lobe of the right lung. In this region, we will also find usually a nice lymph node, which we can see right here, right around this bronchus. That's going to be the cranial tracheobronchial lymph node. Another structure that we see is this latex-filled vein here. That's going to be the right azygous vein. Here we can see a lymph node that has been found right next to a primary bronchus, or the right primary bronchus. That is going to be a tracheobronchial lymph node. Finally, if we look into the cranial aspect, or the cranial mediastinum, we see this glandular tissue, and that's going to be the thoracic part of the thymus gland.